Now let's go over the chemical properties of soil. So these are the three major chemical nutrients in the soil. Sometimes we call them our macronutrients. Macronutrients. So the word macro means big. So macro, sorry, it's a little bit smushed, macronutrients. There are other things that soil needs too, like magnesium and calcium, but they are micronutrients. These are the three that are the main nutrients. And so for nitrogen, what it does for the plants is it creates green leafy growth in plants. And it's a major component of chlorophyll. And if you remember back to biology, it's used in photosynthesis. Okay. You can add nitrogen naturally. You can add it through synthetic fertilizers. We make, again, synthetic nitrogen using the Haber-Bosch process, if you remember that. But we can also add it through compost, green manure, and animal manure is high in nitrogen. Especially like chicken manure. Chicken manure is very high in nitrogen. So in my community garden plot, when people are low in nitrogen, usually they go out and buy chicken manure to add to their plot for green leafy growth. Especially if in the winter we grow a lot of lettuces and spinaches in California in the winter, and so those are mainly green leafy growth. And so nitrogen is a good thing to have, especially in the winter, all times of the year, but more so for the winter plants. Phosphorus is really important for our plant genetics. So the DNA, remember the sugar, it's a sugar phosphate backbone for DNA. So it's very important for genetics. It's also very important for seed development and fruit. And yield. So yield is how much of the crop you get. So how many tomatoes you get is the yield. And for fruit development. And yes, tomatoes are a fruit in the biological world. And it's also for roots. So this winter, I'm planting a lot of root vegetables in my garden. I'm planting potatoes and carrots and rutabagas. So I want to make sure that I have a sufficient amount of phosphorus for those root vegetables. So you can add phosphorus naturally. Now you can get it from fertilizer bags, but you can specifically add phosphorus bone meal. So when they slaughter cattle to give you your hamburgers, they can take the bones and they can grind it up into phosphorus. I'm sorry, it's made out of phosphorus. They can grind it up into fertilizer, which is high in phosphorus. So that's one way. Also blood meal. So blood contains a lot of phosphorus. So those are natural things you can do. You can buy those at Green Thumb or a garden store. You can buy bone meal, blood meal, natural ways to add phosphorus, or even crushed rocks. And so some of our phosphorus comes from some crushed rocks or from guano. So you can get, now guano is more expensive to find, but if you can find it, Guano has a ton of phosphorus in it. Nitrogen, I was going to add fish meal. So at the garden store, fish meal is also very high in nitrogen as a natural way to, it's ground up fish pieces. They don't put in your tuna cans all of the bits and pieces of fish that people don't want to eat. They can grind it up and sell it as fertilizer. The scales, the guts, things like that. Okay, now let's do potassium. So potassium is really important for strong stems. Oh, by the way, I was talking with somebody who did a soil test and it came back really great nitrogen, really low potassium and phosphorus. And they said, oh, that's why I had a really, really good jalapeno plant. It grew lots of green leafy growth, but I only got one jalapeno on my plant. You should get more like 30 or 40. Well, they didn't have enough phosphorus for your fruit development, and the jalapenos are the fruit of that plant. Anything that has seeds is a fruit in the biology ward. So even things like zucchini, it has seeds inside, and cucumbers, those are technically fruit in the biology world. There's no such thing as a vegetable in science, in biology. It's a nutrition term. Okay, strong, spelled that wrong, strong stems aids early growth. So when you put seeds in the ground, the seeds are going to use a lot of potassium to start with. And it fights diseases. So you can add potassium naturally through things like kelp, actually. Kelp. So they harvest kelp, seaweed in the ocean, and they can sell it as a type of fertilizer that's particularly strong in potassium. Sometimes potassium is called potash. It's a farming term for potassium. They call it potash. I don't know why, but it does. Okay, so now let's talk about pH. So pH here, different plants prefer different pHs. So it's in their range of tolerance. So the range of tolerance for most is about 6 to 7. So most plants like it somewhere around neutral or slightly below neutral. Why do plants like a neutral pH? Because bacterial decomposition is best in the soil here, and that decomposing bacteria helps give nutrients to the soil. And so they like this pH best. There are some plants that like a different pH. Strawberries, for example. If you've never had a great crop of strawberries, if you've ever tried to grow them in your backyard, they actually like a pH in the 5s. And most of our soil here in Santa Clarita is alkaline. It's usually 7.5 and above. So strawberries might not be growing very well because it's out of their range of tolerance, our soil. So you have to lower the pH a lot for strawberries. But then the problem is now that pH is lower than most other plants like. And so usually that's not a problem for the store because farmers can lower the pH for growing strawberries, and they grow those usually year round in California. Okay, so what happens if you have too much acidity? So excessive acidity. So if your soil pH is too low of pH, not too low of acidity. So it's too much acidity makes it lower on the pH scale. The way that we say these is really important, and students get these mixed up a lot. And what it does is it causes minerals like calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium to be changed into forms the plant can't use. Okay, now I'm not talking about strawberry plants, but if you try to plant your tomatoes in a pH of a soil that's too low, this is what's the problem. It's going to change. Most of those soils change calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium, sorry, that's a capital M, to be changed into forms that the plants can't use. So that's one thing, and that's going to equal a deficiency in that plant. It also slows down beneficial bacteria. And we want good, healthy bacteria in our soil. Lots of good, wonderful bacteria in our soil. And it increases toxicity from things like aluminum. I'm going to put Al for aluminum. So there's aluminum naturally throughout our soil, and the acidity creates, it causes a chemical reaction to increase the toxicity level from aluminum in the soil. And you don't have to know the exact chemistry of how that happens. You just need to know that that happens. These are very technical things that have all appeared on the AP test. I know they seem really specific, but especially with acid rain. So these things can be caused by acid rain. Okay. When we study chapter 17 and we study acid rain some more, we'll go back over this stuff again. And again, these very, very specific things you have to know. Fortunately, there's not much you have to know on the other end. So excessive or strong alkalinity, so too high on the pH scale, alkalinity, too high of pH. And what that does is it dissolves and disperses humus. And we'll go over humus on the next page. So it dissolves and disperses humus. All right, so what is humus? If you're not done, pause the video, catch up, and then start it again. So now let's do our soil layers and horizons, but first let's talk about humus here. All right, so what humus is mature compost. It is very important. And what it does, it's a buffer for proper pH. Okay, so that's one thing that humus does. And another thing is it promotes microorganisms. That's a macroorganism. That's a worm. Worms are very healthy in the soil, but that's a macroorganism. Humus promotes microorganisms, so bacteria and good fungus. Okay. And it prevents nutrients from leaching out. So I'm going to write that over here. So I'm going to say prevents nutrient leaching through water runoff. So humus, very important for the top of soil. So you'd want it up here in your O horizon. So the very top here is our O horizon. And it is the organic layer. Not organic meaning living thing. So it has your decomposing twigs. Well, actually mostly leaves. So decomposing leaves, twigs, and if there's any dead animals, your dead animals are going to decompose into the O horizon. Now your humus can be on the O or it can be on the A horizon. I spelled horizon wrong here. I don't know why I put horizon. There's no I. Horizon. Okay, so A horizon is known as our topsoil. This, by the way, is the organic, layer. So the organic layer of soil. And then A is the topsoil. So our topsoil is the zone where you have some organic matter mixed with mineral components. So I'll write that down. Some organic matter plus your mineral components. Your sand, silt, and clay, you're decomposing other things, all part of the A horizon. And this is where most agriculture takes place. Okay, is in the A horizon. All right, so the next thing we have is E, but you don't need to know E, so I'm going to give you B here. So we're going to skip E, and we're going to go straight to B. So B is called your subsoil. And it's the B horizon is your subsoil. And it's where your minerals accumulate. It's minerals and nutrients when they leach through, and your soluble metals accumulate. That's a run-on sentence. Accumulate. Okay, it has little organic matter in it. Okay, so very little organic matter. It's mostly the abiotic parts of the soil. So your O and A have most of your biotics parts, and your B and below that is mostly abiotic, so non-living parts. Okay, so down here is your C horizon, and that is the least amount of weathered parent material. And so it's mostly rock that's beginning to break down. Okay, so your A and B over here are mostly going to be abiotic. So your non-living parts of the soil. Your O and A are going to be a mixture of both. So O up here is mostly biotic, and A is going to be biotic plus abiotic. And then this is and, not a T. So and biotic and abiotic in your topsoil. So There's sometimes the labels that you need to know. So O is organic, A is topsoil, we call B subsoil, and we call C parent material. So these are some of the labels that we call them as well. The AP test has used both terms. They've used it just by number, and sometimes they've used it by name of that, I'm sorry, not by number, my letter, and sometimes they've used it by name of that letter. All right, so that is the end of your soil diagram notes.